Hi everybody, it's Leandra from PaperArtsy, and it's time to introduce you to another of our blog topics. We're in the actual last 2 weeks of our semester. We're still running a sort of a semester concept, which is more or less a 3.5 month period. And so we're moving into the 6th topic. Now normally this would finish on the 5th of April, and that would be the challenge deadline, but we've actually got a 3-up week to follow, so we're going to give you an extra week. So the closing deadline for the challenge, if you participate on the 6th topic, is going to be the 12th of April. Now, I don't know if you can guess what the topic is from the samples, but it's something that is such a fantastic product that we couldn't miss it out. And it's Grunge Paste. Grunge Paste is our own texture paste, and it's designed as a stenciling paste, but you can do so much more with it. And I think it is the most flexible texture paste on the market, and I'm going to tell you about the features of it. However, I'm also going to talk about other products that we use regularly as well, and that you as crafters enjoy. And of course, you're more than welcome to use other texture products and other gels and other things in the challenge entry as you are inspired, and just as to your own preference. We wouldn't want to restrict you just to using one product. That's not the purpose of this whole topic concept on the blog. It's really just to spark your muse so that you go into whatever direction you want to go in. So Grunge Paste, well, we tend to use it in backgrounds to create interest. So on this particular background here, this is a sample that Lynn did when she was demoing on the stand, so it's something that she's probably cobbled this together in about 15 to 20 minutes. She's used texture paste in the background, and there's a lot of dragging. She's probably dragged the tip of her paintbrush through the Grunge Paste, and then she's painted over the top, and then she's come back at the very end and put a little bit of treasure gold on there. And that's the great thing about texture. Whenever you add something metallic to it, it really pops. Now this tag here in the background I've done on a previous YouTube video, and here we've got a stencil, and I added to our Grunge Paste this product here, which is called puff paint. It's highly reactive, so you only need a tiny, like 1/4 of a teaspoon of puff paint to about a tablespoon of Grunge Paste, and it just makes it go much more dimensional. So if you can see on here, rather than the leaves on the stencil looking really flat like they would as you apply Grunge Paste through a stencil, they look really nice and rounded. And the reason they're rounded is because puff paint is heat activated. So when you dry your Grunge Paste with a heat gun, it then dries off the product and it heats up and expands the puff paint, and that's how you get that lovely rounded look. So if you want to know more about that technique, you need to go and look for the video. Do a search on our YouTube channel for Grunge Paste and you'll find that video. Here's another example using Grunge Paste through a stencil. This is one of the Lynn Brown stencils, and again this is a very quick sample that was made when we were demoing on the stand, and the Grunge Paste has been put through the stencil. Note how sharp the image always is. It doesn't bleed under the stencil, and also it's been stamped into with a little stamp to give a little bit more texture to the poppy heads there, which is something I really enjoy doing a lot. One of my favourite things to do with texture paste is to put it through a stencil, paint black or dark or squid ink or some kind of dark coloured paint over the top to seal it, and then add treasure gold over the top. And because you've got a dark paint on top of the chipboard and on top of the whole surface, then it seals the surface really nicely. So when you come over the top with the treasure gold, you don't need very much treasure gold at all, and it still gives you that vintage effect of having the darker colour in the background. So that's a really simple way to use texture paste, and one that I use and demo over and over on the stand. I love it. Here is another very quick example. It's basically how the Grunge Paste looks as you apply it straight from the tub. So it's got a creamy white texture to it, but I'm going to go on to do a next step in a demo with this in a minute. Again, I just wanted to paint the underneath layer so you could see how sharp the detail is of the texture paste. one of the problems with some texture pastes on the market is that they're very sloppy and they're very wet. And when they are wet, that means that they're much more likely to seep underneath the stencil. Grunge Paste, if you've used the product, you'll be aware it's a very dry product. It's almost like a plaster. And so because it has this dry characteristic, as soon as it hits the paper, any moisture in there just seems to get sucked immediately out as it hits the paper, and that means that it just doesn't bleed anywhere, it doesn't travel anywhere, and it also means that you can leave it to dry on its own, and it will dry in normal room temperature in about 10 to 15 minutes when it's applied through a stencil. So you don't even need to use a heat gun with it, and for us that's just, you know, super speedy. And of course, if you want to use a heat gun with it, you can. There's no problem whatsoever doing that. It's not going to distort it. It's not going to blister and bubble up when it's that thickness through a stencil. Obviously, if you apply it really thickly, then yes, there's a lot more product to dry, and there is more of a chance of it bubbling up. But just through normal stencils like that, it's never going to blister at all. One other thing, this was an experiment I started a couple of weeks ago, and I was going to show you. And I forgot about it, and then I just stumbled across it recently. So what I did on this is I started with a piece of chipboard and I painted the whole thing blue. It was actually Bora Bora, and then I just sort of dragged, you can see it's kind of quite textural the way it's applied on there. It's quite thick, and in some places I stamped into it, and in other places I just sort of tapped it with my finger to get this more volcanic type sort of style. And in some areas I just sort of dragged the, what do you call those things? These things. God, why can't I think what it's called? A palette knife through the texture paste, through the grunge paste, and when you drag it you get some really nice sort of catching in it. You can create wood grain effects, all kinds of things, just using the palette knife. So then I decided that I'd put some rusting powder on top of it, and rusting powder we've been using quite a lot on the blog the last couple of weeks. Deconstruction, people were using rusting powder to make things go really rusty, and rusting powder just needs something to stick to. So in this case I just sprinkled it onto the wet grunge paste, let the grunge paste dry, and of course the rusting powder then was trapped in the grunge paste. So rusting powder is like iron filings. That's all it is sort of it's a metal, so when you add water to it, it's immediately going to rust. But it's not an embossing powder, it's a metal. So that means that you need to stick it to your surface. You can use a gel medium or any type of glue, even glossy accents. So I stuck it on there directly into the grunge paste, and then let all of it dry, and then I started spritzing the rusting powder with water, and of course water is going to make those iron filings go all rusty. Now, if you want to speed it up, you can put a little bit of acid in your water, and the easiest acid is going to be something like lemon juice or vinegar, which are quite easy products for you to get hold of, and that just sort of speeds up the process. But you can use your rusting powder onto anything. You can use it onto, like I have here, onto grunge paste, or you can also put it onto fabric or wood, all kinds of items. So from there I then just added some other paints and a bit of treasure gold to sort of try and make it look a little bit more rustic, and different colours of paints. I mean, you can put lots and lots of layers onto this kind of thing, but the topic for this fortnight is altered grunge paste. So we don't just really want you to use the texture paste in its natural form. We kind of want you to think about how you can do other things with it, how you can manipulate it, what products you could add to it. So you could add sand or micro beads, or you could even put embossing powder on top of it, as well as your usual suspects like treasure gold and you know, those sorts of things. So maybe start thinking outside the box, perhaps sawdust, or I don't know, crazy things. You guys are going to come up with all sorts of things, I'm sure. So that is a bit about the texture paste. I just wanted to talk to you about some of other products that you might want to have a go with. Crackle Paste is a real favourite of mine. These are the two that I tend to stick to. I prefer the Dreamweaver because I can use a heat gun with it and it will still crack perfectly and it won't blister. This one, most of a one-step crackle like this, it's a white paste, and you can come over the top with them with inks once they're dry. But it is much looser than the Grunge Paste, and it's slightly sloppier and slightly wetter. So if you're using it through a stencil, you have to bear that in mind. You're much more likely to get it bleeding. But perhaps you just want to layer it onto a piece of chipboard or a piece of wood, and as it dries, it cracks apart, and the thickness of it determines the height of the cracks. The golden one is a much lighter product. It's almost like their light modelling paste. It's much more aerated. It's sort of, and the whole tub is really lightweight. So when you apply this is quite flexible. It's a little bit plasticky, and it's very flexible when it's dry. So if you put it onto something like tissue paper, you would still get movement once it's dry. But this does take 24 hours to dry, and you want to sort of leave it to do its thing naturally. Both of those products, you can tint them before you apply them if you wish. Other sorts of products that are available out there, moulding paste. This is another golden product. This is their regular moulding paste. It's a slightly wetter formulation, and it's slightly more claggy than our Grunge Paste. It's a bit more plasticky. And it's really this one's quite thick and heavy. They also have a light moulding paste, which is much more lightweight. One of the main differences between these two are probably quite similar, but the main difference with ours is it's sandable, and because ours is a plaster, if you apply it and you want to adjust the height of it, you can sand it and adjust the levels or create different textures by using the sand, or you can even scratch into it and you can distort it in all kinds of ways. So that's moulding paste. Gel mediums. Gel mediums come in all thicknesses. This one is Golden's regular thickness, so as you can see, it's actually quite thick it's quite a solid product. So if you wanted to use the other thicknesses that they do, they have a soft, which is much runnier, so more like the Ranger products, and the regular is what I've just shown you. They also have a heavy body, which is much thicker. Gel mediums are designed so that you can add your paint to them and tint them and not lose the colour of your paint whatsoever. But probably in the crafting sector, we tend to use them more as a glue or a collage glue, and because they are artist quality, they won't yellow with age. So I never use products that have got a PVA base to them because they will yellow with age. So the classic one that lots of people tend to use is Podge, and that is just like a PVA type glue. So if you put that in the sunlight or in UV light, it will yellow, and it will also crack and flake off with as time goes by. So artist gel products from all of the artist companies aren't going to do that because they're art grade products. So they're just a more stable glue over a long-term period. Heavy body is a lot of fun. This is much thicker, and this one's quite, I would say that compared to some, this isn't massively stiff. Some of the heavy body gels from other brands are much stiffer than this, but it's still quite nice to use as a glue, and it does hold its structure. And that's the thing about a heavy body gel, it will hold its structure. So if you want to create peaks and all those sorts of things, then this is what you can use it for. It's ideal through stencils, but you do have to be patient and let it dry. All of the gels come in different finishes. So you might have a matte finish, which is sort of a very dull finish, through to the glossy. And Golden even have a product called Clear Tar Gel, which is almost like pouring a massive thick gloopy glaze, and it dries clear. It's fantastic. It's great for making skins and things. So I just love gels. For me, they've been so much fun, all of these sorts of texture products over the years. I just love using them. Heaps of fun. Clear gesso is becoming a bit more popular at the moment. It's like using a regular gel, except that it has much more tooth. So if you touch the product, it's always going to feel a lot grittier. It's a very soft product, and you can see it's very thin and runny, but it's got a real grit to it. So it feels like there's some very, very fine sand in there, and that's what gives you the tooth that you want from a gesso. And that's the same with black gesso and white gessos. They are used as an undercoat because they have that tooth factor that allows you to layer other products on top, so it gives you that something to grab to. With our paints, we don't use gessos really anymore because all of our paint has a matte finish, and it's all a chalk. They're all chalk paints, so they have an inbuilt. It's like having natural gesso already in there. But a clear gesso can be fun, and you might want to use that where you need to prime something but not change the colour, like perhaps a wood grain. All kinds of places you would use that. Okay, so that's the key information. I'm just going to finish with a couple of quick demos for you. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the Grunge Paste. As you can see, it is quite a weird sort of formula compared to other texture pastes. It is, like I say, it's a bit like a plaster. And it's very easy to tint it. So if you just put a little bit of Grunge Paste on your craft sheet, please remember to keep the lid on, and also make sure that you get the lid properly into that seal, and don't throw away the little thing that's inside the lid either. That all helps keep it airtight. You don't need very much of your pigment to tint, and you can tint Grunge Paste with, doesn't have to be paint, it could be a re-inker, any dye spray will work, anything that's got a bit of colour in it, and you can change the colour of it pretty easily. And it will always dry darker than what it looks when it's wet. So you just keep adding colour until you've got the shade that you want. Just be aware that you don't want to change the formulation, so you don't need loads of paint. And when I'm tinting like this, I do tend to stick to the opaques rather than the translucents, because obviously Grunge Paste does have its own inherent colour. So if you tint with a translucent, that is still going to show through the translucent, so you won't get the high coverage that you'll get with an opaque. So that's tinted, so now I'm just going to pop that through this stencil. This is one of Emma's newer stencils, Emma Godfrey. Love these spotty things, they're quite cool. And as you apply this through a stencil, you've got a couple of choices. You might want to leave it highly raised so that you've got maximum height on through your stencil, or you might want to sort of scrape it back so that it's thinner and flatter. I could have also added puff paint to this if I wanted, but I've got an idea of what I'm going to show you. So when I'm demoing, I do usually scrape it back because it just makes it a little bit faster to dry. But if I'm sort of working on this sort of thing at home, then I'll probably work on the texture a little bit more. So I'm just conscious of time when I'm demoing. So I sort of spoke a little bit before about how I drag the palette knife through to create texture. So if you just let it grab, and particularly as it's drying, because you get more of that deliberate dragging, which is quite cool. That's one option of creating texture. Another way is to use your finger and just tap away at the Grunge Paste there, and you'll create sort of raised, stippled areas, and that's quite cool. And that's what I did on this one here. So I just tapped it with my finger, and it's got sort of more of a stippling to it. Now the stippling shows up when you've got it on a coloured, when you've tinted your Grunge Paste, it shows up more easily, but that shows up even more when you paint it and then add some something metallic like your treasure gold to it, and then that's really going to highlight it. And the third option that I wanted to show you was stamping into it. Weirdly, when you stamp into Grunge Paste, the finer detail, the stamped images, the better results you'll get. And that's one of those sort of things which I would have thought it would be the opposite, but it's not. So I guess it's because it's not having to push so much product out of the way. So I always spritz it. I've just spritzed it with one that's got vinegar in it. I can smell it. doesn't matter, it's wet. So I've spritzed water, and that gives, and vinegar, it's really smelly, and that gives it a release agent so that when you stamp it into your image, it releases straight out. If you don't like it, of course, you can always smooth it over. You could use a bit of water. Oops, let's use the water, not the vinegar water. And if you add water to it, the other option with your grunge paste is you can get a super smooth surface. So if you don't want to have texture, or you don't want to have it as it is straight out of the out of the pot, then add a bit of water to it, and you can really change the effect again by putting lots of water on there and then just leaving that, and that will make it so soft and so smooth. So there's sort of a few different things you can do. Let's go back up here, and oh, this is already drying up. It is really quite quick, and I think that's one of the other reasons why you get such great results with it, is because it's so fast to dry. It's not a problem, you know, you get really nice sharp results. Now I need to sort of slop away some of this water before I lift off the stencil. Now normally I would probably lift this off and just leave that to dry, but because I'm showing you guys, I kind of need to lift it all off now. Okay, there we go. You see, because we've got the colour underneath, you can see how sharp the detail is from the stencil. If you don't get sharp detail from your stencil, one of the reasons for that might be that the underneath of your stencil is a bit grubby or dirty. So see how just by lifting it off, it's created little bits of texture on the back there. So I must clean that before I use it again. If I put that immediately down onto another surface, that would create a bit of interference. It would lift the stencil up off the surface that I'm working on, and it would just mean that there would be then a gap for product to slide in underneath. So always make sure you clean your stencils. I just use a baby wipe, and if they are really bad, then I use my trusty fairy power spray, which is an oven cleaning solution, and it's really somehow seems to be fantastic to clean paintbrushes and stencils and all kinds of other things. So if you're quick, a baby wipe's fine, and everything comes off pretty quickly. So that's a pretty quick and easy thing to do, and I can dry that with a heat gun, no problem. Now if I wanted to put what do you call that stuff, rusting powder or embossing powder on top of that, you could also do that before you remove your stencil so that you've got it in specific areas. But because grunge paste is like a plaster, you can use the adhesive qualities for those embossing powders to stick to. You don't need to apply another layer of glue or anything like that to be able to do it. And actually, while I mentioned that it's a plaster, one of the other things you can do with it is embed items in it. So a bit like mosaic style, or if you're into the Finnabar techniques where you build up lots of texture with all kinds of found objects, then just put a layer, quite a healthy, thick layer of grunge paste on your surface, embed all your items into it, let it dry overnight, and then it's ready to come back and add all your layers of paint and what have you to, or sprays, or all those kinds of things that you're doing. Okay, so I would leave that to dry, and then I'd probably apply some paint to it. So I'll show you how I would wash paint colour on this one here. And I'll just do it with a really simple colour. So I'm just going to use a little bit of chocolate pudding, and because I really want the paint to sink down into the diffy bits, it's always good to sort of add a bit of water so that you get that paint really moving around. So if you just pull a little bit of colour into the water and perhaps test it first, so just apply that over the top, and you see that even just the smallest amount is going to make a difference, so you don't need very much. And the great thing about distressing things this way with paint is that you really don't need to worry about the permanence of it. So this is sinking down into the texture, and because it's a paint, as soon as it's dry, it's going to be permanent. You've also got an open time, so if you want to play about with how much you've applied, you can dab it off with your baby wipe, and then you can just come back and reapply as many times as you want until you get the intensity. And that's the beauty of using water with the paint on this occasion, is you've just got that little bit more control the paint's not really going to stick and dry immediately. So you're just using that baby wipe and sort of dabbing at it, and it's better to sort of build up your layers slowly and antique things like that slowly rather than all in one go. So let's just another layer. I mean, you can dry in between layers if you wish, and then it does build as well. All of these things are just experimental. I'm sure you've all got your own methods of madness that you prefer. Okay, so once that's dry, then I would probably tick a little bit of treasure gold on it if I wanted to, or just leave it like that. So for treasure gold, I always use a dedicated brush, and this one's Florentine, which is a really beautiful sort of orangey colour, and I tip the excess onto a piece of paper nearby so that I can sense how much is on my brush, and I really am just going to come over here over the top just to sort of catch the texture, and this is where you'll start to see how much texture you've got on there. Now, because I was a bit aggressive and went down in the dippy bits, which I wasn't intending to do, I've now got, see how I kind of went in there, that wasn't the plan. I got the wrong brush, I should have a much smaller brush. So that means I now got to apply it a little bit everywhere to blend it in a bit more. A bit like a bull in a china shop today. But the point of this demo really is just to show you how the stippling gives that texture. So, okay, the more you apply, and you can add different colours, different layers, but it just is really nice to highlight the texture, and you wouldn't see that if you didn't have a metallic on top. So that's the great thing about treasure gold, and of course treasure gold is permanent. And that is fabulous because you don't have to worry about it rubbing off on anything. Once you've got it on your surface, that's it, it's there to stay. You don't have to use just one colour, you can use several colours, which tends to be what I do. Okay, so that just gives you an idea. It's, you know, you could do this over a whole background where you don't have to have a stencil. You could just apply it, stipple it, and use your treasure gold to give it some really nice texture. So there's just a couple of ideas for you. Thanks for joining us on the challenges every fortnight. This one is Grunge Paste, Altered Grunge Paste. The closing date is going to be 12th of April, which is a week longer than it would normally be. So you've actually got 3 weeks to play along with texture paste, crackle paste, gel mediums, all those sorts of things. Have some fun and share with us on the blog what you've made. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you here next time.